Hi, this is Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Mahler's Eighth, the Symphony of 1,000, which means it's also the Symphony of 1,000,000 possible mistakes, because that's what happens when you have that many people together. The Mahler Eighth is kind of like, a car with all of the electronic options, or some really cool piece of electronics with every possible bell and whistle attached to it. All that does is multiply the potential for things that can go wrong, and quite often they do. Now, as a challenge to the conductor, the Mahler Eighth doesn't so much require artistry and interpretation as it does the abilities of a traffic cop. You're really just sort of pushing people around constantly and trying to keep everything together. It really is almost a purely technical job. The more you try to interpret, the worse the thing is probably going to sound. I mean, it really is, all that's happening for most of it, let's face it, is that the orchestra, however huge and colorful it is, and it is huge and it is very colorful, it's accompanying. It's accompaniment. The conductor is an accompanist. The feature standout parts go to the choruses and the soloists. So, it's really the conductor's job to just get out of the way and let everybody do their thing. Now, the number of performances where that happens, as you might imagine, conductors being the egomaniacs that they are, is unfortunately few. And the biggest problem with the Eighth usually happens in the finale, which just drags. It really drags, especially when you get into those central solos, one after the others. The trio of three annoying women, and all of that stuff. The vision of the Virgin, and you have to keep it moving. You just have to keep it moving. And unfortunately, a lot of performances just bog down at that moment. So, and I have to confess, this is a moment of devastating honesty. I've kind of soured on the piece lately, not because it's not a magnificent piece of music, although I do think that other Mahler symphonies are better on the whole. I think the problem, at least for me, is that it has ceased to become the event, the festival piece that it really deserves to be. It's a big deal when you do the Mahler Eighth, and it should be prepared and presented that way. But now, somehow, for some demented reason, like Girl Eater, it's basically just entered the repertoire. Anybody can throw together a Mahler Eighth, it seems. And that's how so many performances sound. A couple of years ago, I saw a live concert with Leon Botstein and the American Symphony. It was a disgrace. It was so ill prepared that the orchestra had to start the second movement, the second part, the Adagio, which is in a slow 4/4, 3 times. They couldn't get it together. That's a disgrace. And to do that in the Mahler Eighth is just to show contempt for the work. And so I'm almost afraid to go and see it now. Of course, the fact that the first part of the concert contained the Ives' Fourth Symphony probably tells you what they were spending all of their time working on. But anyway, let's talk about some recordings. Now, there are some iconic recordings that we all know. There's Leonard Bernstein's, which is very good. Let's not kid ourselves. His first one, the Sony one, although the recording distorts in places and doesn't quite capture the massive forces as well as it should. Scholti's is, and was for many years sort of the go-to recording for a lot of reasons. It has a terrific roster of soloists. It's very brilliantly, if somewhat gimmickly, recorded. And Scholti does not dawdle, which is an absolute plus. He gets through the thing. The problem for me is that the very ending, the climax, is somehow that just doesn't quite ignite. It's a bit prosaic, and I don't think that for all the spotlit, glories of the sonics, they somehow don't add up to a cohesive sound picture. I don't think the performance has anything wrong with it as much as the engineering somehow takes some of the impact away from it. Michael Gielan did a very good version, and there were always some other ones. There was, of course, that famous live Horenstein performance that ignited the Mahler Renaissance in England or something, as if we care about when the Mahler Renaissance was ignited in England, frankly. That performance is a shambles, and it's a typical Horenstein performance in that it has frigid, stiff tempos, and it really dies in the second movement. But now, when it comes to great recordings of the Eighth, I'm very picky, and I only have two that really, I think, excite me. And this is very personal, obviously. It'll be personal to you, too. The first is Gary Bertini's. This was recorded live in Tokyo with the Cologne Radio Symphony Orchestra. It's a great performance. Bertini has a very simple concept. Play the whole thing quickly and excitingly, but when you get to the coda, stop and go for as much transcendental, hysterical, sonic splendor as you possibly can. And boy, does it work. It's just thrilling. You know, the second movement has this, it's like Wunderhorn music, you know, Mahler's Wunderhorn music. Some of it's very folksy. It flows, it's natural. But then you get to the chorus mysticus and that final conclusion, and he slams on the brakes, and just the heavens open, and it's just spectacular. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a little bit like Klaus Tenstedt did in his recording for EMI, the one that everybody bragged about was so good using smaller forces. And it's also a very attractive performance in a lot of ways, even though, because it uses smaller forces, it obviously isn't as massive as Mahler probably intended. But for me, the performance to have, if you're having only one, of the Mahler Eighth, is a surprise maybe. This one, Antoni Witt on Naxos with Warsaw, the forces from Poland. It's the Warsaw National Philharmonic Choir and Orchestra and a bunch of other choirs. A large list of mostly unknown Polish soloists, all of whom sing splendidly. I have to tell you, Witt is a really, really fine conductor generally, and he's very good in choral music. And this is a Mahler Eighth that has a naturalness to it. The engineering particularly is really what you hear when you hear the Mahler Eighth in a nice warm hall with all the forces properly arranged. And he conducts a performance that it's not fast. He doesn't rush. He shapes all of the lines, all of the arias and sections in the second movement lovingly. The choruses sing magnificently. The first movement is as grand as you can ask. The polyphony and the giant double fugue in the middle of the first movement is clean and clear, but it just flows. It feels as though the music is self-propelled, and that's what I want to hear in this work. You don't want to be conscious of this giant machine operating. You just want to hear the result, which of course is just magnificent music, a hymn of praise in the first movement, and then the slow build to the great conclusion at the end. And I really, when this performance first was released, I was a little bit skeptical because it's Mahler Eighth, and it's the Mahler symphony that most people fail in pretty spectacularly. But I was dazzled by just how successful and impressive it is. Let me just let you see it again. It's Antoni Witt with the Warsaw National Philharmonic Choir and Orchestra on Naxos. The price can't be beat, and neither can the performance. So if you're looking for a great Mahler Eighth, trust me, folks, this is the one to have. Thank you very much, and keep listening.